Welcome to a Soulful Pause, everyone. I'm so excited to have you all here with us, and I'm really excited about our guest today. I'm Josette Diaz, and I'm a self awareness coach for women that are in midlife who are high achieving. And I also run a beautiful community that is called An Artist Guide to Journaling. And effective in January, we are changing the name to The Art of Awareness because it's a little more specific about what we do in our membership. And this is where you get to develop your own art language, start to understand your internal rhythm, and reveal the things that are sitting in your subconscious mind that stop you from connecting to yourself and living the life of your dreams. So, if you're interested in creating life from the inside rather than responding to life from the outside, then this might be the group for you. So, our next meeting is on December the 19th, and I will be putting links after the show into the post here. So keep an eye on that if that sounds like something you'd like. Now, I'd like to introduce you to a wonderful woman who is goes by the name of Melissa Cancel. I'm going to ask her exactly how she pronounces her last name. And Melissa has a PhD in communication, 30 years teaching experience, and a healthy, satisfying 18-year marriage, not an 18-year-old, an 18-year marriage, still going strong. And Melissa started the Communication Doc with a passion to help committed married couples improve communication, cut conflict, and achieve the kind of fulfilling marriage they've always dreamed of. They have 6 kids, 6 grandkids, a grand cat, Loki, and a grand turtle named Bob. You got to love Bob, right? Life is busy and challenging, but they work on using healthy communication to manage it all. So stay tuned, and I will be bringing Melissa on with us so that we can have a really good conversation about how to manage.
Ladies, are you the one who gets it all done? Always pushing forward, always striving? In the constant chase for success, when was the last time you took a moment just for you? We're always on the go, rushing from one task to the next, barely pausing to catch our breath. What if we took a moment to pause? Imagine listening in, really listening, to the wind, to your heartbeat, to your soul. What if slowing down was the key, a chance to discover a deeper connection with yourself? And from that connection expand it to those you love, to the moments that truly matter. Pause, reflect, connect. It's time to live fully from the inside out.
Good morning. Now we're back. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Josette. How are you?
I'm good. Can you please pronounce your last name? Because I want to pronounce it cancel, and I heard you say it differently, and then I remembered it right when I was saying it.
Yes, it's Cancel. My husband is Hispanic, so if you want to say it with the correct accent.
Ah, nice. Nice. Well, thank you. So tell us a little bit about your background, Melissa, because we had such a great conversation the other day. It was probably at least a week ago. And
Yeah.
I found it fascinating. I really resonated with your background and where you came from. And I'd love for you to tell everyone that little bit of information about you.
Sure. Well, I'm going to give background related to what I'm doing now, but I was one of those people in high school always everybody came to with all of their problems. And so I knew I needed to do something in helping people. So I ended up going to college to get a BA in psychology, and while I was there I came across interpersonal communication. I took a course in it, and that is all about communicating in relationships. And I loved how practical it was. And so I ended up getting a master's and a PhD in interpersonal communication. And I started teaching college. The first 18 years of my career, I taught at a small private Christian college in Clearwater, Florida. And that was my perfect job. It was very intimate. I got to know my students, um, interact with them outside of class. We had a drama club that I was involved in. I was involved in productions because I have a background in theater as well. And my family would come on campus and eat dinner, and my youngest would come with me to faculty meetings. So it was very much a family environment. It was my job. My friends were there. And then in 2015, the college closed suddenly after 50 years of being open. And that really turned my whole world around. If you want to talk about a defining moment in your life, if that had not happened, I think I would still be doing the exact same thing. And I would be very content with doing the exact same thing. But because of that circumstance, I ended up needing to try to find something else to do. And that has been a journey over the past almost 10 years. And that journey is really what led me to starting my business, because I love teaching. I love helping people communicate more effectively. But teaching college students, I don't often have married students. I do sometimes. And it
Yeah.
seems like every time I have a married student in my class and I start talking about how to communicate effectively in relationships, those students come to me and say, "Oh, I wish my spouse could hear this." And
Mm.
so I decided, well, you know what? I need to make it available that these spouses can also hear this information that I'm giving, these skills that I have healthy relationships. And
Yeah. I think you're back, Melissa. Are you here?
I am.
Okay, great. Okay. So you, where it cut off for me, where you were talking about the healthy relationships that others wanted in their marriage.
Yes. So that really was my inspiration for starting my business, so that I could offer what I've been teaching in the form of college classes to
Mhm.
people outside, that
Yeah,
couples could take those classes and benefit from the training that I have to offer.
I love that. So, in I'm going to go ahead and jump off from there because, that is quite a story. Is I know that there are other people that can resonate with, there's always a defining moment, right? And no matter what that looks like, it can be having the college closed down. It can be the end of a marriage. It can be, losing a job. It can be all kinds of things. And so I always frame that as that's actually your calling that is coming for you. It presents for you. And so it to me seems that your deeper calling came and here you are. So I absolutely love your story and I can totally resonate with that. I had a similar experience with different circumstances. So, given all of that, I'd like to kind of like ask you, what are some of the common like pitfalls that couples find themselves in communication um, and how can they begin to address that? Because I think communication is such a huge thing for everyone, and we don't always think that, um, we communicate every day, all the time about everything we do, yet we don't really think about how we communicate with the people we love the most.
Mhm.
So, can you kind of give us a little insight into that?
Sure. So communication is actually the number one complaint when married couples seek counseling or therapy. 67% of couples will say that they're having problems communicating.
Mm,
And I do believe that communication is key to a healthy marriage. I don't necessarily think that communication is the core issue in all 67% of those cases,
Mm,
but it makes sense that if you have good communication skills, whatever the problems are you're facing in your marriage, you can communicate about them and come to a resolution. If you have poor communication skills, the opposite is true, right? You
mhm.
can't
Yeah.
communicate about those problems and come to a resolution. So the problems are just going to continue to stay there and get worse, which is why communication is so key.
Yeah.
So as I was thinking about developing my program and my courses that I offer, I identified three categories of issues that we typically have. And this could be outside of marriage, but I'm specifically addressing these to marriage. The first one is misunderstanding. We do not understand our spouses. We don't understand how they think differently than us. And I think this especially comes into play when we're talking about gender differences.
Mm,
Men and women think differently, we speak
mhm.
differently, we listen differently, we
Yeah.
perceive that we build relationships differently, we have different needs. And it's hard to get out of your own perspective and be able to understand how your spouse does all those things differently. And we
Yeah.
end up getting frustrated then, like, oh, my husband doesn't listen to me. Well, maybe the reason he's not listening to you is because you don't understand how he listens. And you're not also trying to help him to be able to adapt to how you speak, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So that whole misunderstanding that can happen, and it can be more than just gender, right? Culture can play a difference, background can play a difference. We have different biases that come
Yeah.
into play that, if we're not aware of, can impact how we understand others. So that's the one big component, is understanding. The second one would be the actual communication, right? So
Mhm.
once we fix how we understand our spouses, then we have to make sure that we're communicating effectively, verbally with our words,
Yeah.
and non-verbally with our actions. So that's the second component. And along with communication then goes listening, right? So I can communicate effectively, but if my spouse isn't listening effectively, or vice versa, we're going to have issues in communication.
Mm,
So that's the second category. The third one then has to do with conflict, right?
yeah.
So my philosophy is that if you can understand your spouse, you can learn to communicate more effectively, listen supportively, you're going to cut a lot of the conflict that you have in your marriage.
Mhm.
But you're still going to have conflict.
Right.
So when the conflict arises, then how do we manage it effectively? And then once we're able to do that, the final component, or the fourth aspect, would be that in our busy, stressful lives, we do not place a priority on our marriages like we should.
Mm,
And so we really have to work to maintain that connection and that health in our marriage so that our marriages can last. So I relate it to our physical bodies.
mhm.
If our physical bodies are healthy, other things can come in that impact us. I can get sick, but because my body's healthy, I'm able to fight off that sickness better,
Mm,
faster than somebody who has an unhealthy body. And it's the
mhm.
same way with our marriages. Our marriages are healthy, then whatever comes into our lives, we're better able to deal with it and come out the other side even stronger. But if our marriages are unhealthy, those unforeseen circumstances that come into our life, or those trials or those storms, are going
Mhm.
to make it that our marriage can't handle it. And that's what leads us then to the point of feeling like our marriages are failing.
Yeah, I love that you compared it to, like, your body. It almost sounds like your marriage is your immune system. And if your immune system's low, then you're not going to be able to muster up the correct kind of responses, or, well, is that a little too clinical, saying correct responses? Like, is that, um, at the same time, it sounds like, when you mentioned, understanding the communication or how your spouse communicates, and is that all based on generally, like, the way you're raised? Is that where it kind of stems from most of the time for most people?
It depends. I do think how you're raised can play into it because obviously, as children, we learn patterns of communication by watching the people around us.
Yeah.
So, for example, specifically with conflict, one thing that I've noticed is that there's typically two extremes that parents have in dealing with conflict in their marriage. One is going to be that they deal with it only behind closed doors, right? So they have
Mhm.
conflict, but they deal with it behind closed doors out of the sight of the children. And so then the children grow up and get married and start having conflict and think, why do we have this problem? My parents never fought. Well, your parents did fight, you just never saw it. And so you never
Right.
learned how to deal with conflict.
Right.
Or you have the other extreme where you've got the parents who have all out brawls, right? And yell and scream and then that's what the kids learn when it comes to dealing with conflict. So we don't often intentionally teach children how to deal with conflict in an effective way that actually helps to resolve the conflict.
Mm.
And so that's just one example of a pattern that we can learn as children from our parents that then comes into play in our communication in our own marriages.
Okay. So what are some of the things that contribute to make up your communication style, how you listen? What are some of those different aspects that come into play that create all of that beyond family interaction?
I think personality is definitely a part of it, culture, gender, and then different life experiences.
Mm.
I'll just give you, a real short example. So I didn't date much in college or even beyond that. I didn't end up getting married until I was 34.
Yeah.
And that in my mind created some issues for me where I was thinking, oh, well, I must not be attractive enough. There's something wrong with me, that type of thing. So that kind of thinking from that life experience caused me to communicate, or not necessarily verbally, but maybe non-verbally in ways that presented myself as less confident when it came to interacting with a potential mate in the future.
Mhm.
So that's just an example of a circumstance, but those kind of things can impact how you think, which then, of course, impacts how you communicate.
Right. That's interesting. Well, and communication is also nonverbal, right?
Correct. Yeah, and in fact, majority of our communication, the majority of the meaning of any message is going to be nonverbal. It's about 75% of a message's meaning is nonverbal.
Mm.
And so, verbal communication, we have to consciously choose, even if it's a way I've formed a habit of communicating. Let's say at some point had to consciously choose my words. I had to choose to communicate in that way. Whereas nonverbal communication is much more um, unconscious, subconscious. I've got my cat who wants to join our, our call today.
We like
Yeah,
cats.
that's Loki. Yeah, so nonverbal communication is much. We have, in order to change it, we have to focus more attention on it because we do it so naturally we don't think about it.
Right. That's what I was just thinking listening to you. I was thinking about, all the times that I've heard someone say, or even myself have said, um, "Oh, I can tell that you aren't going to wanna do this," or, because you pick up on certain facial cues or
Mhm.
a certain way someone sort of, like, maybe stares off, and so you have these assumptions based on patterns that you've recognized. Is that kind of how that works
Mhm.
in the other person? And then if you're assuming you already know how they're going to respond, I would assume that that may contribute to some of the communication problems that can occur. Does that seem to fit or?
Yes, exactly. I recently did a master class called Overcoming Four Thoughts That Will Destroy Your Marriage.
Mm,
And one of those thoughts is that whole idea of mind reading your
yeah.
spouse. So Yes, you do over time learn certain ways that people communicate non-verbally, but you have to be careful with those assumptions,
Hmm.
reacting based on those, so
Yeah.
that if my husband does or says something and I react to it in a negative way because I've made an assumption, I know what he's thinking, that can create conflict.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do is to ask,
Mm.
to say, like the example you gave, you made this expression on your face, which seems to communicate that you're not a fan of this idea. Is that a correct assumption? And that gives the person then a chance to say yes or no. I was
Right.
actually thinking this instead. And so you're checking your assumption before you respond or react to it
Mm.
instead of plowing ahead with it and maybe potentially creating conflict in the process.
Right. Because then you end up creating your own problem that wasn't
Yeah,
ever a problem.
exactly.
And that's always fun when you do that.
Yes.
I also love that it's like it just comes across very fair. Like that's a fair way to communicate. Like then
Mhm.
you're not assuming that you know everything about someone because you can never really know everything about someone.
In the master class I did, I had a young lady who's just recently married who had said, "Well, over time, don't you end up kind of learning your spouse's habits?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, I'd
Mhm.
say my husband and I have been married for 18 years, and I think I may know what he's thinking or what he's communicating about 18% of the time. So maybe it's 1% per year. My parents are almost at 60 years marriage, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I asked my mom, I said, "So do you think you understand dad 60% of the time?" And she said, "I don't think so." So
That's really funny. Yeah, I mean, especially with a couple that has had that kind of longevity, to know that they don't even feel that they know the other person that well to always predict what they're going to say, think,
Mhm.
and respond like.
Right.
So
Well,
that's
because
great.
we change as life progresses, right?
Right.
So we're never always the same. Whatever circumstances come into our life, the things we experience together are going to change us and keep us growing. And that's another reason why it's important to keep connecting with your spouse, to keep
Yeah.
sharing the things you're experiencing and learning, because if you don't, if you get to that point of intimacy, we use in relationships, we talk about escalation and de-escalation. So if you think about an
Mhm.
escalator, you go up this escalator to the point of intimacy, which is where you should be in a marriage, but the
Yeah.
escalator doesn't stop. You don't
Right.
get off of it. You're still on it, and you have to keep working at keeping that intimacy, or if you don't, it's gonna go back down, right? And before you
Mhm.
know it, you're headed in the opposite direction of where you wanna be. So you have to keep sharing, you have to keep having discussions, having talks about your relationship. My husband and I periodically will analyze our relationship. So how is our marriage doing? What do you feel like needs to be improved? What do I
Mm.
feel like needs to be improved? What can we do to things that would help make our marriage better? Because we know that it's not going to stay the way it is if we don't keep working on it.
That's so true because it's like a unattended plant, right? You have to keep watering it and giving it its nourishment in order for it to continue to grow. So,
Exactly, and that is so hard in our busy lives, right? I am
yeah,
awful with plants. I have a black thumb. I think I've killed every plant I have.
same here. Succulents even.
So, but if you equate that to our marriages, if everything else is a priority and
Mhm.
we don't put a priority on our marriages,
Yeah,
the reality is if that plant was that important to me, I would take care of it.
right. If
So
it
the
was
same
in your
thing
mind
applies
all
to
the
our
time.
marriage.
Yeah, yes, yes. I was gonna ask you something about that. Oh, so how for I meet a lot of women that have had, difficult situations with spouses or other people in their life, not just spouses,
Mhm.
where communication is so difficult because the other person, um, has a okay, let's just use this example. I mean, I know this word gets tossed around a great deal. So I'm not really wanting to put anyone in a box here, but I'd like to just kind of have a quick conversation around how do you handle difficult people, such as someone that is borderline personality or narcissistic? How do you have
Mhm.
conversation or communication with those types of personalities that are in your life?
Those situations can be so challenging because even if you can classify somebody as narcissistic,
Mhm.
there's not like one set way to deal with everybody
Yeah,
who's narcissistic, right?
right.
Because they're gonna have their own unique aspects that come into play. Um, I can't give a straight across the board answer to
Yeah, I
that because
understand that.
of the differences. I do find, though, that when it comes to marriage, when our basic needs are met,
Mhm.
that frees us up to then meet our spouse's needs. So sometimes the focus becomes, my needs aren't being met, and what can I
Mhm.
do to make my spouse meet my needs? As opposed to thinking, what are my spouse's needs?
Mhm.
And trying to meet those needs, and the reward of that is often that then your spouse is able to meet your needs in return.
Mm. So keep the focus on yourself and in the sense of getting your needs met.
Right. And what can you do, right? Because
Mhm.
I can't control anybody else. I
No,
cannot control my husband. I
right.
can't control what he does. I can't control what he thinks. And if
Mhm.
my focus is always on trying to control him to get him to do or say or be X,
Right.
Y, and Z, right?
You've already
What
lost.
I'm not focusing on is the one thing
Yeah.
I can control, which is me.
Right. Yeah.
So I can control my reactions, my responses, my development.
Mhm.
And in the process of doing that, that will often allow my husband to then respond in kind.
So,
Right.
yes, I that's a great answer, and I think that makes so much sense to frame it in such a way that it takes it doesn't perpetuate the possibility of you having this codependent dance with the person who's difficult to communicate with.
Mhm,
It really comes down to taking care of your needs, first of all, so
mhm.
that you can then, um the partner or the friend or the parent that you have difficulty communicating with then starts reacting to you differently. Is Does that kind of frame it correctly?
Yes, I think so. I do think there's an extent to which, once we are getting what we need, right,
Mhm,
we have
mhm,
more than to give to others.
right. Yeah.
So, for example, I say marriage is supposed to be 100%, 100%. I should focus on giving 100% all the time. My spouse should focus on giving 100% all the time. Now,
Mhm,
that's a mindset.
right.
Realistically, can I give 100% all the time? Absolutely not,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But if I take the typical focus that it's 50-50, right?
Mhm,
I
mhm,
do my 50%, my husband does his 50%. Well, what now? My husband is sick. So
mhm,
he's not pulling his 50%. Well, now our marriage is not functioning fully because we're
mhm.
less than 100%.
Okay, right.
But if my focus is on giving 100% all the time, as much as I'm able, then
Mhm,
when he can't, our marriage is still functioning. Or when I can't, our marriage is still functioning.
mhm, mhm.
Does that make sense?
That completely makes sense because there's always going to be a deficit somewhere, right?
Mhm,
In some area, whether it's a larger percentage or a shorter percentage.
mhm.
So if you always have that intention behind it, intention drives so many different things. And I think that it
Oh,
really can,
definitely.
yeah, and it drives your ability to communicate, like you were saying, like
Mhm,
dealing with difficult people, having the intention of taking care of you. And then when, approaching your marriage, I love that you spoke of having that check-in moments in a relationship to see how healthy is it, and are you still on board with the things that you agreed to, and are those working out well? I mean, and when we spoke before, privately, I really enjoyed that conversation we had around keeping things with a healthy perspective,
Mhm.
not necessarily a happy marriage, a healthy marriage. And can you kind of expand on that just a little bit? Because I think that's something that's so worthwhile sharing.
Mhm. Sure. In fact, I was recently speaking with someone who a female, and I find that this tends to happen a lot with us as females.
Hmm.
She was talking about how that whole idea we grow up with happily ever after. We're going to
Yeah.
find the perfect one. We're going to get married and we're going to live happily ever after. And she feels so disillusioned because that
Mm,
hasn't happened. And
right.
like she made the wrong choice with her spouse because it hasn't ended up being happily ever after.
Mm,
And that is a lie.
yeah.
Happily ever after doesn't happen for anyone. Because when we're talking about marriage, we're talking about two different people trying to intertwine their lives, into something new.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be seamless. It's never
Right.
going to be perfect. And then you add into that all the different life circumstances that come into play. And it's never going to be happily ever after. You're going to have happy moments,
Hmm.
but you're also going to have moments that are not happy. And happiness is completely dependent on our circumstances, right?
Yeah.
I like to use the term joy instead, because to me,
Hmm.
joy is something I can choose to have regardless of my circumstances. It's based on my perspective. But that's why I use the term. So my program is called Get Communication Healthy in Your Marriage. My title of my business is the Communication Doc. So I'm
Hmm.
focused on this idea of having a healthy marriage, not a happy marriage. Now, a healthy marriage is going to be more happy than unhappy,
Yes.
right? But
Hmm.
I'm not frustrated by the fact that I'm not always happy or that I'm having problems in my marriage, because I understand that that doesn't exist. Every marriage has problems. Every
Right.
marriage is going to struggle, but every marriage can also be healthy.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, I agree with you. I think that, and it takes two people to maintain that focus.
Yes. Which is another reason why in my business, I may at some point offer training specifically for women, but at this point I'm only working with married couples, because
Okay.
no matter what I can teach women about how to communicate, and yes, it would help and it would improve the marriage. If your spouse is not on board,
Hmm.
it's not going to have the same impact on your marriage overall as it would if
Yeah.
both of you see that your marriage is sick,
Hmm.
that you need to work on it. You need to get your marriage healthy and you're willing to work on it together.
Yeah.
Then we have the opportunity for having a healthy marriage. A healthy marriage cannot be one-sided.
Hmm. That's right. I mean, there's two people in it. So, yeah. And I like that it's framed around um, a marriage being sick, which indicates it can be well.
Mhm. Yep,
So I
healing is
really love that.
definitely possible.
Yeah, yes, right, exactly. And you can if you want to, and you both agree, and you both want it. So I've really
Exactly.
enjoyed our conversation. I'd like to know, what do you have in the works coming up that you'd want to share with everyone?
Great. Well, I am very excited about a holiday mini course I'm offering right now during the holidays called Strengthen Your Marriage to Survive Holiday Stress. So
Mm,
during this busy time of the year, we tend to forget about our marriages, and all of these different things come into play that affect our connection. They affect a conflict we have and how we manage it, and also affect our how we relate to each other in the sense of building and maintaining trust and expectations. And so that's what this course addresses. It's 6 short modules that are 90 minutes total, so it doesn't take a lot
mhm,
of time. And there's some really practical things that you can put into place to strengthen your marriage so that you can get through this holiday
Mm.
season instead of being frustrated, having unresolved conflict, and entering the new year worse. You can build trust and peace and joy over the season and enter the new year healthier than you are right now.
Mm.
And so they can learn about that by going to my website, which is thecommunicationdoc.com. And you'll see all the information there on the page. They can sign up for the program. This is a paid program, but it's a great price for the value that you're going to get to strengthen your marriage and be able to get through the holidays successfully.
Okay, great. I love that. Well, we're going to put everything that you have for the audience to reach out to you and to connect and to attend your course. That's beautiful. Such great timing, right? And can only imagine that it's going to take you beyond the holidays. So it's a worthwhile investment. And so we'll be putting all of that information into the comments on the social media platforms as well as on YouTube. And I just really loved our conversation. I think that anyone watching who watches live or sees the replay is going to really get a lot of value from you. So I really thank you for being here, Melissa. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me today.
Thank you for having me, Josette. And I really, my heart and my passion is to help married couples. I'm saddened by the number of divorces that happen. And while I understand there are some things that can cause marriages to break up, there are a lot of marriages, I think, that if they just had the tools they needed, the prescription to fix their marriage sickness, they would be able to make it healthy and continue. And those stronger marriages give us stronger families give us stronger societies. So
Yeah.
that's my passion. I want to help everybody I can.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's so valuable, the work that you do, Melissa. And it's really important to focus on couples. I agree. It's beautiful. Thank you. So, everyone, I will be back with you next week. And if you are interested in the Art of Awareness membership, just comment art at the bottom and I will reach out to you and send you some information. And again, Melissa's information will be also posted in the comments. So stay tuned for next week and have a lovely weekend, everyone. Thank you.